going on, guys? My name is Austin. This is the Bodies in Business podcast. And today we're going to talk about Mark Cuban for the Positive Influencer series. And honestly, Mark Cuban has done a lot of things in his life. He's built $1 million companies, $1 billion companies, and he's been on Shark Tank. And it's really cool because it doesn't seem like he's lost the fire in his belly to want to build things, even though he's a billionaire and he wants to try to learn more each day and build something cool. So I think I listened to two podcasts that he's done. One he did back in 2013 and one that he did with Lex Fridman 2 years ago. And then I listened to a documentary that was done on Mark Cuban, like this was probably 15 years ago. And all three had pretty similar information, but also the cool thing about it was Mark hadn't really changed much about what he thought about how to build a successful company and why he was successful. And I thought that was interesting because a lot of the things I heard from the 2013 interview were the same things. I heard a lot of the same things in the Lex Fridman podcast that was just 2 years ago. So he has obviously changed over time, but his processes and his will to understand how to build a great company is still very much the same. One of the first questions that Lex asked him was, what makes a great entrepreneur? In his 2024 podcast with him. And Mark said these basically three characteristics that make a great entrepreneur. He said someone who's curious, someone who's agile, and then someone who can sell. And I'll go into what he said for someone who's curious. He said, they want to keep learning because business is always changing. It's never static. And then someone who's agile, he said, as the environment around you changes, you have to be able to adapt and make those changes. And then for someone who sells, he says, no business ever survived without sales. And as an entrepreneur, when you're creating a company, whatever your product or service is, if that is not the most important thing and you're not dying and excited to tell people about it, then you're not going to succeed. And I think those three qualities definitely encompass being a good entrepreneur, because we always think like, oh, our product's going to sell itself, or at least that I think like a good product kind of sells itself. But even someone like Elon Musk, I remember reading his book and learning that at one point he turned every engineer and every person in the company into a salesperson because their company was going to fail unless they sold a certain number of Teslas. And so sales is so important. And to be honest, I don't love selling and the idea of selling, because I just feel kind of grimy. But the way then Lex's next question was, how do you sell? And this was kind of interesting how to turn selling on its head a little bit. Mark said, selling is just helping. Can I help the person? And I thought that was interesting because it kind of reframes the situation. You're not trying to sell something to somebody. You're just trying to help them and make them better. And he said, when I was selling garbage bags and at 12 years old, I would go door to door selling, and he would ask them if they needed to save some time for me to bring them garbage bags at their house. And so that was kind of cool when you reframe it as like, how can I help the person that I'm talking to and not just try to sell them my product? So at the end of the day, you want to get to understand what your customers or what your users want and how can you help them more. So that was a really good reframing, and it was at the very beginning of the podcast. And actually it was awesome to hear that, because I wanted to start this off with that. And then I just wanted to I wanted to talk about his 2013 interview that he did. It wasn't a podcast back then. There were still interviews. And there was just so many like little bits of wisdom and a little backstory on Mark. And so he has always had like an entrepreneurial spirit. When he was really young, he would repackage baseball cards and try to sell them again. And then when he was 16 years old, he would sell stamps. He would buy stamps and then sell them. And then when he was a junior in high school, he actually took classes at the University of Pittsburgh his junior year in high school, and they didn't even finish high school, which is kind of interesting. Most people brag about not going or not finishing college. Well, he didn't even finish high school. But Mark tells a story about when he was little and he was playing in Little League, and he got hit in the mouth with a baseball bat or baseball. And he said his parents were not wealthy enough to get him some caps that were white looking. So he had to have silver caps in his mouth. And he said he had to wear these big glasses, and he said he was kind of big. And so he was this little chubby kid with big, thick, silver teeth in the front and then big, thick glasses. So you can imagine that he was probably a little insecure about himself when he was growing up. So I think he had a little chip on his shoulder. And he said he found that he really understood business, and business became his sport because he wasn't necessarily like the best athlete on the field when he was young. So he was like, you know what, I'm going to win in business. And then he got in. So he was accepted into Indiana. And when he got to Indiana, he was getting his classes and he actually signed up for MBA classes. And he said he decided to take a bunch of hard classes his first 2 years and not drink so that he could party really hard as a senior. And I think that's interesting because, you don't really think about that. And honestly, when I was in college, I remember I knew my older brother just did management and he was able to play football all 4 years. And I was like, oh, I'll just do management. It seems like an easy job or easy major. And it's interesting because I have this saying of like, you work hard now so that things will be easier later. And that resonated with me when he said, I took really hard classes the first 2 years I was there and I didn't drink so that I could party after. And this would actually come up again whenever he sold his company, Micro Solutions. He said he didn't take a vacation for 7 years when he was building Micro Solutions. And then right when he sold Micro Solutions, he actually bought an lifetime airline ticket for American Airlines. And he said he traveled all over the world and partied with every single party he could get into. And so I think he was like 27, 28 when he sold Micro Solutions. So he was still a pretty young dude. And I'm sure he had a great time doing that. But I thought that was interesting of like how the analogy of when he was in college, he worked really hard the first 2 years and then he partied hard his senior year. And then he went on to grow Micro Solutions for 7 years and then he partied really hard after that. So it was kind of similar. And then he said one of the portions of the interview that I really enjoyed him talking about was when he was actually working for a business software company and it was called Your Business Software. And he said that sales cures all. And I love hearing that because it's the same type of mentality of like winning cures all in sports. If you have a really bad game but you still won, it's still a win. If there's everything going on in your world, but you're still winning, it's in sales. If you're still selling and things don't seem like they're going really well, but you're still selling, it cures the bad feeling of other things not going well. It's not the only thing that matters, but it's kind of interesting that sales cures all because he said the company was actually not doing well and he actually brought it back and it became really good. I know that was kind of random, but he also said there was another part. He said RTFM, which means read the freaking manual. He said most people don't take time to read the manual to understand software because they just want it to work and they just want it to work for their business. And I think the same type of thing is for health and wellness and people in businesses. Like they just want to be able to eat food, drink stuff, and do good work. And it's like, okay, no, you are software. You have to understand what's really good to put into your body so that you can put your best product out there, which is you. And so I think I really dive into what is going to help the human body be as productive as possible and be as good as possible so that other people can be their best in their industry. And I think that's super important. So he just understood software to the best ability so people could do their job better. And I'm understanding people the best I can be, or understand people the best way possible I know how to, so that they can optimize their performance in business. Okay. So he sold his business and went on his trips and stuff. And then now it's 2013 and he talks about how startups and entrepreneurs are kind of like fading away from actually wanting to start a profitable business and then go IPO and then grow even more. So I just want to tell you this quote because I think it's very pertinent to what's going on in today's world. He said, it used to be build a company, make it profitable, then go public. Then the internet bubble came along and it was build a company. You don't even have to be profitable and then go public. Now it's come up with an idea, put some sweat equity into it, raise some money from an angel investor to get it going, and then hopefully raise more money from a VCs. He says, then do a Series A, then do a Series B, hopefully IPO if you're enormous, or just be profitable. He said, your goal as a business today should be to become obscenely cash flow positive, that you can store the capital, otherwise options are declining. He said the idea of building a company has become bastardized, where people just try to raise money and raise more money. And if they can raise more money, that's the end game in and of itself. So I think that's interesting because I feel like that's kind of the case these days, because people think when you raise money, like you've made it. You're like, okay, cool. People believed in my business and they believed so much in my business, they gave me millions of dollars. And a lot of companies have failed because of that. And so that's on the investors and the people building the company. One of his quotes he said, the best equity is sweat equity. Raising money is actually a weakness and not a strength, because now you're beholden to someone who just gave you all that money. So if you can hold off raising money as long as possible, then do it, because you hold all the power. All right. Another quote that I really liked, he said, faster, better, cheaper are not good reasons for an investable company. Here's what he said, this is what he would invest in. Here's why they can't do it. Here's why we're differentiated. Here's why it's compelling. Here's why we're going to disrupt them. Here's why they can't respond. He says, faster, better, cheaper, those people will learn how to do things faster, better, cheaper, but those whys are the reason why he would invest into a company. And then the last thing that the interviewer asked was, if you could leave the one golden nugget for entrepreneurs about business, what would it be? And his answer was, do the work. Most people don't do the work. And this is so true for most people. It's at the end of the day, it just comes down to grinding out day in and day out, having enough money so that you can live, and then build your company bit by bit so that you're more profitable every year. It doesn't have to be every month, but every year, so that you feel like you have a sustainable business. And as you're building your company, then you're coming up with new ideas to maybe bring in more revenue, more profit, and you're staying afloat. That doesn't mean you have to be $1 million company overnight. And most businesses take 6 to 8 years to even become a real profitable business. One thing he did say is when he built Micro Solutions is he was profitable every single month that he was in business. So I've always tried to live as frugal as possible when I've built fly bodies. And I think that's helped me stay in business, because if I would have, spend beyond my means or do other things that would put us out of business, then I would have to go raise money. And I don't want to go raise money with something that I'm gonna have to give up a ton of my company for. And he said, usually a lot of people go, I got this idea. He says that a lot of people go, I got this idea, I think it could work. And then they just fall through with the execution. They'll say, oh, something came up. My friends want to go out to, a movie, or, my family wants to go out to dinner, or I'm going on this trip. All these things can come up in your life. You just have to be willing to say no. And it goes back to him saying, I didn't take a vacation for 7 years in order to make Micro Solutions work. And he's a billionaire. Not everybody wants to be a billionaire, but you're going to have to sacrifice something in order for your new company to probably work the way you want it to work. So I thought it was really cool. Mark Cuban definitely has a lot of good hot takes and insight, and it was really interesting learning a lot about him. And I highly recommend going to listen to those 3 podcasts / interviews / documentaries and learning more about him. So that's all I got, guys. Hopefully that's helpful. And if you made it this far, appreciate you. Get after it.